everyone. I'm Aretae Wyler, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at the Atlantic. We'd like to welcome you today to our annual Atlantic Festival. We're so glad you're here. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to talk about the future of business sustainability. The global pandemic brought about a whirlwind of change, but it also presented new opportunities for businesses to take the lead in solving environmental challenges. So we're going to talk today with some of the top leaders in this space. Before we get started, I have two quick notes. We want to thank our underwriter, EY, for their support of the festival and our journalism here at the Atlantic. And we want to remind you at home that you can participate in the conversation via the Q&A tab. Please just tell us where you're from, and if you ask a question for our speakers, we can incorporate them into the conversation. Now let's get started.
For a discussion on measuring the impact of corporate climate efforts, please welcome Trevor Hauser, partner of the Rhodium Group, and Kathleen McLaughlin, Chief Sustainability Officer at Walmart and President of the Walmart Foundation. Atlantic staff writer Robinson Meyer is here to lead the conversation.
Thank you both for joining us. Let's dive right in. I'm loving this music, by the way. Trevor, let's start. Despite the U.S. not having ever passed really comprehensive legislation addressing climate change, the country's carbon pollution has fallen since 2005. I'm wondering if you could just start us off by answering, how did that? What has the private sector done to impact decarbonization?
Great, thanks, Rob. Great to be here. So while it's true that the U.S. hasn't passed comprehensive climate change legislation, the U.S. has passed, both at the federal and the state level, plenty of legislation that has a positive impact on the pace of technology deployment to address climate change. And so that ranges from tax credits for clean energy sources like wind and solar, to investment in research and development, to state level programs driving renewables and clean vehicles across the country. And those incentives have increasingly attracted business investment into both the development and deployment of clean energy technology. So there has been no shortage of policy work in the US to incentivize businesses to invest in clean energy. And we've seen a lot of that investment bearing fruit in the decline in emissions over the past few years.
Kathleen, Walmart is the world's largest retailer. And last summer, Walmart announced a goal that it would aim for zero emissions by 2040. It also announced a conservation goal to manage, protect, or restore 50 million acres of land by 2030. How did you set these goals, and what do they mean for Walmart?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be with you here today. Thanks for having me. You know, Walmart has been working on sustainability since really 2005 in earnest. And over these last 15 years, the evidence has been mounting around not only the pace and magnitude of climate change, but also the degradation of natural ecosystems and the very real impact those trends are having today. We see it all around us in terms of extreme weather events, drought and so on, flooding, but also in the future. And, the latest IPCC report is just an example of something that's underscored just how widespread, pervasive, severe the impacts of climate change and nature loss are going to be for all of us on the planet. So really for Walmart, we realized a number of years ago that we needed to raise our game. So we became the first retailer to set a science-based target for emissions reduction. And then last year, we elevated that ambition to keep it in line with the 1.5 degree warming scenario, and also to set a date to hit zero emissions in our own operations, which, as you mentioned, is 2040. And it was important for us that that be truly a target of zero, not net zero, but zero for us by 2040 in our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And for scope 3, when we set the original science-based target, we started to work with our suppliers on something we call Project Gigaton. So we now have over 3,100 suppliers working with us on that program, which aims to avoid a gigaton of emissions by 2030. And so for us, this is just part of a need, a recognition that we have to rewire the way that business gets done, because all parts of society need to rewire how we live day in, day out, so that we can decarbonize life, essentially our operations, and come within that 1.5 degree target. And nature, it's a similar thing, right? The evidence is clear about the degradation of ecosystems. We've lost 60% of animal life since 1970, based on estimates from World Wildlife Fund. And so if you're a retailer and you're selling everything from bananas to bed sheets, to seafood, these things come from nature, shampoo even. So many of our products either come directly from nature, right, or rely on ingredients from nature. So working on these things is critical for surety of supply, for cost structure in the future, for revenue streams, for the very health and longevity of our customer communities and our associate communities around the world. It's so integrated.
Can you just walk us through what you mean when you say scope 1, scope 2, scope 3? I think that's a term that we're all becoming more familiar with, but folks who just got into climate change may not fully recognize it.
Yeah, scopes 1 and 2 have to do with the emissions that come directly from our own operations or things we're directly purchasing, like electricity, for example. Scope 3 are things that are outside of our control that, for example, as a retailer would be in our supply chain. So for us, scope 1 and 2 would include our electricity that powers our stores, our fulfillment centers, all those refrigerator cases and freezer cases. It would include emissions from refrigeration, so the cooling equipment and the freezer cases and so on, air conditioning. It would include the emissions from our long haul fleet, which we own. So how do we fuel those big Walmart trucks that you see on the road, for example? And it would even include things like on-site fuels. So if we're using gas to cook rotisserie chickens, that sort of thing. So that's scope 1 and 2, those kinds of things. Scope 3 is everything that goes into the making and the consumption of our products. So it would come from the energy used to produce products, from product design itself. So for example, cold water laundry detergent can get your clothes clean without needing to run a hot water cycle. That's a lower emissions product. Packaging. Waste is a source of emissions in the supply chain, food waste and plastic waste. And then nature itself can be a big solution for climate, but it can also be a challenge if people are deforesting to provide commodities like palm oil or soy or beef or paper. Agriculture also can either be an emitter of greenhouse gases, or it can be an opportunity to sequester. So that's where, in our Project Gigaton, we're working with suppliers to address those kinds of drivers in the supply chain and decarbonize the way that we produce and consume the products that all of us use day in, day out.
You mentioned nature, but you also said Walmart is trying to reach zero and not just net zero. I mean, do offsets through carbon capture or through afforestation factor into Walmart's plans?
We don't intend to rely on offsets for our scope 1 and 2 initiatives. So we believe that, given the challenges we face as a society, wherever possible that, we can get to true zero, we should do that. And that's tough because, things like long haul transportation, we don't have a solution today for our kind of transportation. We have long haul trucks that go multiple days without, stopping to recharge and so on. So that's going to be a challenge, but we think we can get there. Scope 3, that is something where we would say the world needs to get to net zero. So there are certain things that are going to be hard just to get to zero. So for example, emissions from dairy cows, we can reduce them, but at some level cows emit. So you need to look for offsets for things that are residual that can't be addressed. And so for that, yes, afforestation, reforestation, but such projects, we work really closely with scientists. They have to be done in a certain way to actually get the carbon benefits, to actually sequester the carbon. And so there are issues around how that work gets done, the permanence of it, because I could do a wonderful job managing a forest for the next 10 years, but if I cut it down in year 11, I've lost everything. So how real is the impact on carbon? Is it permanent? Is it additive? All of those things. And there are many people trying to work through what has to be in place so that we can feel confident in the kinds of projects that folks are pursuing that, that can happen. And there's tremendous work underway. I'll give you one example. Nature Vest, which is part of Nature Conservancy, has been working in the Cumberland Forest region, southeastern United States. It's about 250,000 acres of forest, and they have been working to better manage the forest, which gets carbon sequestration. They're still able to do some managed timber production and some ecotourism in the communities. And so you get great biodiversity and carbon outcomes. They're able to sell credits into the carbon market and so on. And it helps the people who live in those communities with revenue streams to sustain their livelihoods. So there are a lot of projects like that that are emerging where we're seeing tremendous carbon impact, environmental impact for climate change, but also social and economic outcomes too. And that's really, as a society, what we need to start solving for. Where you have solutions that really help us take care of people and the planet.
Thanks so much. Trevor, you have this kind of incredible bird's eye view, and you and Rhodium have this incredible bird's eye view of the energy system. What, in your view, are the most important steps that companies can take to get serious about decarbonization and to kind of meet their Paris Agreement goals, or to put us on the road toward net zero globally by 2040 or 2050?
Right. Yeah. So there's been a proliferation of net zero pledges by large companies over the past couple of years. And those companies are now turning to the implementation. How are they actually going to meet those pledges? And I think you can get a little bit, if you look just narrowly at what share of the current 52 gigatons of emissions globally those companies that have made net zero commitments represent, it could lead you to conclude that these types of corporate commitments are only going to really have an impact on global emissions at the margin. But I think that misses two potentially catalytic roles that corporate commitments can play, and is what we look for in assessing whether a company's internal commitments are going to have a broader transformative effect on the climate. And so the first is companies for whom energy is a relatively modest cost of production compared to what they pay their staff or marketing, are in a unique position to spend the money required to develop early stage technological solutions and drive the cost down so that they can be scaled beyond the four walls of those companies. So Kathleen was talking about long haul trucking. If companies like Walmart can figure out how to drive the cost down for zero carbon long haul trucking solutions within Walmart's operations, that has the potential to have transformative effects on long haul trucking globally by accelerating the diffusion of those technologies. So that early stage technology development and deployment work by companies as they look within their own scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and figure out how to reduce their own carbon footprint has the potential for an outsized impact. The other is policy engagement. As companies look to their scope 3 emissions and realize that they have limited direct control of those emissions, our preference would be not to see companies respond to that just by purchasing offsets to address their scope 3 emissions, but instead engage in policy, supporting the development of policy that will have an effect on those scope 3 emissions. And I think as more and more companies work to implement their net zero targets and realize where the limits of their own action lie in meeting those goals, our hope is that will translate into more forward-leaning policy advocacy around climate by those companies.
And if I could just comment on that, if I could
Please
comment
do.
on that, Robert. Trevor is so right. I want to just talk about the first one that you mentioned, Trevor, in terms of the ripple effect, and that's very much a driver behind our focus on Project Gigaton. So by engaging 3,100 suppliers as they make changes in their supply chains, and we're supporting them with various programs and tools and so on, it ends up affecting not just the part of their business that is with Walmart, it's their entire business. So these 3,000 companies are from all categories that we sell. They're in over a dozen countries around the world. We're trying to drive a broad cultural change that would affect the way that products get produced across all of the lines that we sell. or renewable energy. We've been quite focused on getting to 100% renewable energy for our own needs. We're just about 36% at the moment, but we engage in PPAs and community solar projects and so on that collectively have added 2.3 gigawatt hours to the grid of net new renewable capacity, and we're trying to bring our suppliers along. So one of the things that we did with Schneider Electric was put together a program that offers to our suppliers the opportunity to engage in aggregate PPAs. So if a supplier doesn't have a procurement team for energy, they don't know how to go about it, they can tap into this as a way to basically get renewable energy. So we're constantly looking for ways to scale, expand, make this the norm, not just for us and our own, scope 1 and 2.
That makes sense. On policy, it sounded like you gave a hint at this in your answer, Kathleen, but does Walmart support the Paris Agreement?
Absolutely, yes, and then some, right? So as I said, we had made a science-based target that was in line with the Paris Agreement, and then we reset it to go for the 1.5 degree scenario instead of the 2 degree scenario. And we need enabling policy. I'm also with Trevor on this one. Like, we're not going to do it alone. Business is not going to solve this problem alone. There's a lot we can do and have been getting on with things. And there are a number of policies that are in place. You talked about some of them, Trevor, but we need more. The world needs more.
Is Walmart doing policy activism? I mean, is Walmart engaging on the kinds of policies that it thinks we need?
Yeah, we're very clear about our aspirations for our own business and needing an enabling policy environment to shift the grid to renewable energy. We need to tackle refrigerants. We need policies that are going to be in favor of decarbonizing transportation. So yes, it's a priority for us. If people want to learn more, you can check out our ESG disclosures on our climate strategies and advocacy and so on. We're part of We're Still In and We Mean Business. We're on the board of REBA, the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. It's a very important lever. We're not policymakers ourselves, obviously, and we'll leave the specifics
of course,
to
yeah.
policymakers, but broad principles, absolutely, we need it. We're not going to get there as a society without strong enabling policy.
I want to get right back to that, but I first want to say, Trevor, what are some of the policies that you think are really important and would help corporations advance here? And I have to ask about the most pressing policy on the table, which is this reconciliation bill. What would it do for climate, and could it help kind of companies advance the ball here? And also, what would it mean for the U.S. like Paris Agreement, the U.S. under the Paris Agreement?
So there's two pieces of legislation under consideration right now. There's a bipartisan infrastructure framework, and then there is a budget reconciliation bill. And they together would be by far the single largest piece of climate legislation the U.S. has ever adopted. Budget reconciliation bill alone, the major components of that, just the 6 largest components, would by themselves reduce U.S. emissions by 1 gigaton by 2030, and would be the largest single portion of a comprehensive plan for the U.S. to meet its nationally determined contribution of a 50 to 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The bipartisan infrastructure framework is not as large in terms of its climate impact, but does have some important and significant programs, and would deliver another 100 to 200 million metric tons of emission reductions if passed. So this is really a once in a decade opportunity for legislative progress in the U.S. on climate, and would. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
No, do you think the U.S. could meet its climate goals if the reconciliation side of this package failed, especially its goals under the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, I would think about it more. It will be extremely challenging. There are other legislative vehicles that individual pieces that are in the budget reconciliation bill could be moved through, but to meet the 2030 goals without any new congressional legislation will be extremely difficult. Doing so exclusively through executive action under existing laws like the Clean Air Act can deliver significant emission reductions, but it would be extremely challenging to meet that 50 to 52% target without legislation.
So Kathleen, I have to ask, what is Walmart's position on this reconciliation bill?
We don't have a position on the reconciliation bill writ large. It's quite a broad bill with a number of things contained in it. But I would say that the climate provisions in that bill, in the infrastructure bill, and other things that are being discussed, for example, carbon pricing, that's something that, we also need to look at and we need. So, I'm pretty excited by the broad range of things that are being discussed and proposed. I think Trevor is right. The trick is, okay, so what's the right vehicle to get things across? We need a enabling policy environment. We're really clear on that. That's going to be to the benefit of the economy and to business. So
could I just ask, what kind of policy engagement is Walmart doing here? Because I do know at the same time that, there's lots of different options on the table. Walmart is a part of the Business Roundtable, which is lobbying against the reconciliation bill, running TV ads against it. It is a part of the Chamber of Commerce, which opposes the bill. And I know the bill is big and complicated.
We're not part of the Chamber of Commerce. I don't know why people think that we are. We're not.
Well, the
BRT. So Doug is the chair of the BRT.
So the BRT is lobbying against the bill. So, and I know that's because of tax policy. But is there any way to preserve these really big climate aspects in the bill? I mean, what is Walmart doing here on a lobbying front?
Yeah, so, as I said, the reconciliation package, it's enormous. It's $3.5 trillion with a lot of things in it. I'm not really in a position to comment on those pieces. What I can say is that the climate provisions in that bill, the climate provisions in the infrastructure bill, and other things that aren't in either that need to get on the table, like, pricing and so on, carbon pricing. These are all critical. We've got to find a way to have them come to life to really create the environment that will be supportive of the pace and magnitude of climate action that we need. So, that's really critical. We're very clear on that. I would say.
Will Walmart use its lobbying heft? I mean, Trevor was talking about how this is kind of one of the two big things Walmart can do, and clearly it's doing the first with Project Gigaton.
Yeah, we do. So, we have a global public policy and government affairs team. They're engaging constantly with policymakers in all the various markets where we operate, including the US. And our views on climate and what needs to happen are really clear. It's something that we do talk about day in, day out, as we're on the Hill or in other places. It's really important.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it right there. But Kathleen, thank you so much for being here. Trevor, thank you so much. Always good to talk. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Rob. Take care.
Next up, a session produced by our underwriter, EY. Conversations with leading CEOs on the ESG transformation imperative.
ESG is absolutely a boardroom, C-suite, and CEO issue. CEOs, C-suite, and board members know that they've got to engage. They're going to be held accountable by multiple stakeholders, whether it's regulators, whether it's their investors, their employees currently, potential employees that they're looking to recruit, suppliers, and other partners.
Maximizing shareholder value and also stakeholder value. I think they're one and the same. Every time I've made a decision or transformative decisions, I've always thought through, how does our customer feel? How are they going to feel about this? How the supplier is going to feel about this? Certainly how our employees are going to feel about this. These things all matter. It's not just the end goal of making money here. Those things will make you money if you do the right thing, and you'll have a great culture in your company.
We set environmental goals 30 years ago in terms of how to reduce our carbon footprint, how to eliminate solid waste, how to reduce water usage, greenhouse gas emissions, all of that. We put safety metrics in place, environmental health and safety, to make sure that our people who came to work could be safe. We started community outreach programs, donating to the arts and to education and to science. These are all things that we did not because we had to, but because we thought they would enhance the value of the business over the long term. You can't have a vibrant company without a vibrant community.
Every leader needs to challenge themselves and to really look at their organization as objectively as possible and identify opportunities to create long-term value for all of your stakeholders. We are very focused on societal value and the impact that we have on the world, the communities in which we work, and the people that are part of our spheres of influence, as well as policy matters that ultimately endure to the benefit of our communities.
I think the importance of sustainability has really shown itself over the last 12 months. I think what's different is now linking sustainability to long-term growth and long-term value. I think companies are going to continually have to ask themselves, what impact are we having on the environment, the people who work with us, and the communities where we operate? I think that connection is going to continually become more and more important. And so I think companies that link sustainability with growth are going to outperform those who do not.
We always say sustainability is not a nice to have, it's not part of our business somewhere. Sustainability is our business. When you think about it, beer, no water, no beer, that's simple. No farming, no ingredients to brew beer, that's simple. Businesses only exist because societies allow them to exist. So they have to look at you and see that you're part of the solution, always. And you provide something that's good for the community as well, not only good for the company or for the business.
Set the bar high. That's what you got to do as a leader. But you've also got to tie that to your purpose, to your mission, to your culture, and to your values. And that's crucial when embarking on any sort of strategic transformation.
You have to have courage, because inertia tells you to just keep doing everything we're doing, because you actually have to disrupt what we're doing and say we're going to shift our direction. We're going to push innovation harder. And I believe that people working together and working together, laughing together, having some fun together, it's all an important element of work, and I think it's kind of been lost in this era. So my job as a leader is to really be that glue that maintains some level of connectivity to the greater good, to who we are, our mission, our company, and we are the sum of all of us, much greater than any one individual. And I think it's important to maintain that tie, and I think that that's the one thing I try to do more than ever, is to communicate that bigger mission.
People and culture are at the heart of most businesses and are critical to a transformation. It is, after all, about change. Figuring out how to engage the hearts and minds of your employees, your stakeholders, your consumers, your community at large is really important. And culture can be an accelerator to how that change is adopted.
My number one job as CEO is really to nurture the culture. And the pieces of culture that are very, very important to me, it's almost beyond inclusiveness to belongingness. Inclusiveness is inviting somebody to the table. Belongingness is about this emotional connection that people have in an organization to each other, to the mission, to the organization. And when I think about an atrium, sort of you walk in and you have all kinds of people there in dialogue. We're going to invite everybody to the table, and that's core to our brand, it's core to our mission.
I think that the important thing about company culture is that it's not the CEO culture, it's a company, it's a group's culture. So if I leave tomorrow, or if I disappear tomorrow for some reason, the culture will remain in place because it's not my culture. It's my colleagues' culture as well. So it's everybody's culture, it's everybody's responsibility to keep it alive and make sure that people that are coming in will also subscribe to that same culture and same value set.
What does your company stand for? What do we care about? What's important to us? And your employees need to hear that. That's important to them. You have to have a heart and a soul in a company together. Healthy, growing companies are really helping every constituency and every stakeholder.
Every organization needs to constantly raise their own bar and needs to do it in a way that's culturally authentic. And that has certainly been the case since I've been the chair of EY in the US and the Americas, really looking at the strengths that we have, as well as opportunities for improvement, and making sure that we're informed with an outside-in perspective, not only to have credibility, but also to have the experience in bringing that advisory capability to our clients as they transform their own businesses.
For a discussion on the social and environmental impact of hybrid work, please welcome Chris Capossela, Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President of Marketing and Consumer Business at Microsoft, and Jennifer Christie, Chief People Officer, Twitter. Robinson Meyer is back to lead the conversation.
Chris and Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. Let's go right in. So, Chris, I want to start with you. You know, the pandemic shifted millions of people to go to fully remote work, as we all know. Here I am at home. Now we're 18 months into this workforce experiment, and it seems like things have kind of permanently changed. So, you know, Chris, we'll start with you. Jennifer, we'll go to you. Can you briefly share how the pandemic has impacted your office culture? How you have responded to it? What is your work from home status quo right now?
Well, great. Thanks, Rob. And Jennifer, nice to do this with you. I'm really looking forward to this. Thanks for having me. You know, I would say that Microsoft is really trying to be a student of the time in our approach to hybrid work. It's been, you know, quite a journey that I think all of us have gone on. And through all of this uncertainty, our number one priority continues to be the well-being and safety of all of our people. That kind of goes without saying, but it's the number one principle we have in how we're sort of approaching hybrid work. We've actually been able to study a lot about what's going on, and we've produced something called a work trend index, which is essentially a report of research that we do of our own employees, as well as tens of thousands of employees in different industries around the world. And the fascinating thing we've seen over the past 18 months is really, we've discovered two pretty fundamental trends that are changing the work as we see it and as we know it. And the first trend is what we call the hybrid paradox, where we see that people want the flexibility to work anywhere, but they simultaneously really, really crave a lot more in-person connection. And that hybrid paradox is sort of the big first trend we've seen over the past 18 months. And then the folks over at LinkedIn have seen another trend that they call the Great Reshuffle. And this is really, you know, companies all over the world sent everybody home to work from home. And as they did that, we've seen employees re-examining their relationship to work. And it's resulting in what we think is very deep changes to employee expectations. We see employees rethinking not only when and where and how they work, but Rob, you know, why they actually work. And so we think we're going to see a major reshuffle of people changing jobs. And that's going to be a huge change. So the hybrid paradox, where people want flexibility, they want to work from anywhere, but they crave in-person connection. And the Great Reshuffle, these are the two trends that we see creating fundamental changes in the labor market. And we're all going to have to navigate them.
And so just to confirm, you are fully remote right now. There's no occasional hybrid. There's no people going in once a week if they want to in masks.
So we have people in 104 different locations around the world, and based on what's happening in every one of those locations, we have essentially a workplace dial where we dial up or down based on the data and local guidance. And we are fully open in a bunch of countries in the world. In the US, we are not absolutely mandatory work from home, and we have tens of thousands of people coming to different work sites in the US every day, but they're not required to do that. They're allowed to work from home if they want. We're not fully back to what we call stage 6 anywhere in the US today.
We should scroll all those 104 locations and their various stage in front of the TV like it's an old Time Life, you know, ad. Jennifer, can you just give us an update on where Twitter stands here? Are folks are you fully remote right now? Are people coming in? And just what have you observed in terms of Twitter's culture?
Yeah, so I would thanks for having me here. It's great to see you both. But I would zoom out a little bit to even 2018, because we started on this journey before the pandemic. We were moving to a more flexible work culture and more flexible work options in terms of where people worked. So not just if you worked from home or you worked from an office, but also being able to move to different geographies and work in different places that you wanted to work. So we started down that path a few years before the pandemic. We have pivoted to fully remote work during the pandemic, as most companies have. And as we're starting to navigate this phase of this pandemic, we do have some of our offices starting to reopen, but we're leaning still into flexibility and choice. And while a lot of our employees, I would say the majority of our employees, about 75%, do want to split their time between an office and home, some 3 days a week, some 2, some 1. We still have some people who want to be full-time remote, and we have some people who want to be, very few, but we still have a small percentage that want to be in the office full-time. And people can choose and toggle between these different types of work styles once we fully reopen. At this point, if our offices are open, they can choose those styles. They can switch between those styles, and that's ongoing. Even when our offices are fully reopened, people will still have that flexibility and choice. And that's what we're seeing people want. They really do lean into flexibility and choice. And when Chris was talking about, people are re-examining how they work and where they want to work, what companies they'll work for. I think flexibility and choice is a big decision point for them on that. They've learned different ways of working. They have different options to them now. And they are asking those questions, and they're looking for companies that are going to provide them that kind of flexibility and choice. So I think it'll be a differentiator for companies that can figure that out and are allowing their employees to work in different locations or have that choice for themselves.
Have you seen a change from this pre-2018 or this post-2018 kind of where you were starting to experiment with remote work to the pandemic remote work regime? Like, you were already experimenting this kind of, you were out there in front of everyone else. But now things are still different because we're still somewhat in the pandemic. Like, what were the changes there? What did you observe?
Yeah, so I would say before the pandemic, we definitely still had some resistors to this kind of change because it was a pretty big change for us. We started out in that 2018 and pre that as a very office-centric culture. And we were driving this change not because, frankly, it was employee driven at that time. Mostly, it was something that we thought would make us more durable as a company for the future. We knew that this was kind of the way the world was going, and more companies were coming online, fully remote, and more of our employees were starting to ask for it. So it was definitely a trend, and we knew we needed to try to catch up with it. But we still had a lot of folks who were resistant. Oh, I can't work that way, or I can't manage my team that way. And the pandemic forced change. And it also forced people to recognize what they're capable of. And, the managers who are like, I can't lead that way, have really leaned into it. We leaned into them to say, you're on the front lines, let's help you figure out how to do this. So if their style was more monitoring versus managing, we helped them figure out a way of setting goals with their employees in different ways and checking in with their employees in different ways. And so I think this forced nature of this change really did push people into a situation where they were able to kind of tap into what they're really capable of. And so it definitely accelerated our timeline in terms of building capabilities around remote work, for sure. And it's managers and teams that said we could never work except we're right next to each other are now completely distributed. And so as we start opening offices, they're going to be working in very different ways.
Chris, how are you thinking about creating the kind of new work environment? I mean, you mentioned that stage 6 is fully open, which I think implies that there are 6 different ways that work could be right now. How do you approach weighing these new work environments with meeting employee needs while still kind of keeping the company productive and keeping teams productive? I guess that's the big question, but just, is there a certain tool you've taken to it or a certain way of thinking that you've gone about using it?
Yeah, it is such a great question. And just like Jennifer said, we're big believers that the future of work is flexibility. And there really is no one size fits all approach. I think we've really come to embrace that over the past 18 months. And a lot of the reasons we hear from employees that they want to work from home are the exact same reasons that we hear from employees that they want to come to the office. In our latest study, about 58% of employees told us they wanted to work from home for better focus, and about 58% told us they wanted to come to the office for better focus. So there is no one size fits all approach, and we find that we have to really do a great job. Managers play a bigger role than really ever before, and coming up with team norms. It's one thing to have a policy about something, but really the role of the manager to model to coach and to care for their employees and come up with the norms of the team. And those norms might include every meeting having employees join the meeting via Microsoft Teams, even if they're together physically, so that everyone can see the faces of everyone in the meeting. And the chat window can maintain this inclusivity that we've seen. The role of the manager, team agreements, intentional hybrid meetings, encouraging employees, really basic things, Rob, encouraging them, believe it or not, get enough sleep, daily exercise, eat well, drink a lot of water. I know it sounds basic, but if managers show that level of caring, we're finding that employees feel looked after in a way that makes them able to do their best work, whether they're coming to the office because that's what they like, or whether they're staying home because that's what they like. That the role of the manager, model, coach, and care, some of these basic things are more important than ever.
You're a manager, so I have to ask, is there one tool that you found really effective? Just like one small thing, or it really changed your approach to kind of managing in this environment? Because I think a lot of managers are struggling.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a couple that I really rely on now. I'm much more conscientious at the beginning of meetings to check in with people, to literally spend time, first 10 minutes, 15 minutes of meeting. I know it sounds like a long time, but do a check on how are people doing, how are they feeling, what's going on with them before we get to the sort of agenda of the meeting. And creating space for that sort of mental well-being is super important. The other one that I've been surprised how effective it's been is when I do one-on-ones, rather than doing them with video chat, I actually do them on the phone and do sort of a walking one-on-one. And, sometimes people will take their dog out for a walk or go for a walk while they're having a one-on-one, and it breaks up that monotony of being in front of your screen all day long. So, finding ways to change it up a little bit, creating those new norms, I think are really important. And we're learning. This is uncharted territory for all of us.
Yeah. Have you seen a widened talent pool in this switch to remote work? Like, has it made it easier or harder to recruit? And Jennifer, I think let's go to you first.
Yeah, so actually it was one of the drivers of this change for us back in 2018 to widen the talent pool, not just to be hiring in a small number of locations, but we said, wow, there's great talent everywhere in the world, and we are really narrowing where we are sourcing talent and where we think that they can work effectively. And so it was definitely something that opened up for us, and now being able to post roles really that are remote only, or it's one of the options of a location, has really opened up the talent that we can tap into and who want to work at Twitter, which is great. And it expands our diversity of the people coming in to the organization, expands the global reach that we have in our organization, which has been really great. I want to add too. You didn't ask me the question about the tool, but I will. I just want to share one.
Yes,
one tool,
yeah, please.
that has been effective for me as a manager, but for me as also just being a member of Twitter, or a part of Twitter, is Slack. Actually, it's one thing to think about getting work done, but and you can get work done on Slack, but we've used Slack a lot for team engagement and for fun. That's one of the things, that we always enjoyed about being around each other in the office, was having fun and a little bit of the silliness and weirdness. And Slack allows you to kind of engage with each other in a more real-time way than maybe like an email might, and not having to always be on Slack, where especially with distributed global teams, everyone's not going to be on a video at the same time. So, being able to engage when you can and when you want to on a thread that's happening, or being able to post GIFs or emojis or videos. It's just been a real way to keep people connected and things that are not just work related, which we all know happens when people are around each other in the office. They're sharing stories about hobbies and lots of different Slack channels about different things that people care about. So that's been something that we've really found very effective.
Well, does Twitter think about? It's so funny because I'm very familiar with this from the Atlantic. Does Twitter think about managing those Slack rooms? Like, do you think about your role almost as a kind of moderator of those discussions? Does Twitter devote resources to moderating those discussions? Because I think many companies have found that Slack is great. You can get people to almost hang out there, but at the same time that you have this rolling discussion feature, it's almost like you have kind of suddenly a chat room as part of the office and it has all the ups and downs of a chat room. So just how do you think about almost your role as a manager moderator, or are there moderators at Twitter?
No, I mean, not moderators per se. I mean, like Jack has a Slack channel that he's opened up that people can kind of ask him anything. And, you know, I'll scroll through that and sometimes he'll tag me into it to answer a question that's kind of people related. We want to make sure that we're answering questions that get surfaced in that, but no one's really monitoring it or moderating it in that same way. And it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot to kind of sort through and challenge, make sure that you're finding time to answer everything and see everything that's going on. But we didn't see everything that was going on before, so we might miss some things. And if not, someone tags me or someone tags someone on my team. But Twitter is about all voices. Twitter is about hearing different points of view, whether they're challenging things that are happening at Twitter, whether they're discussing things that are going on in the world. Our service is like that, so we want everyone to be respectful, and that's something that we definitely pursue with our healthy workplace initiatives that we have. But within that guideline, people can ask questions, people can challenge each other, people can really call to action things that they want to see changed. And so it keeps us on our toes, but it's great. I wouldn't change it because it really helps us keep our hand on the pulse of what's going on in the organization and get ahead of things that are both making our employees really happy and engaged and things that might not be.
Chris, I want to ask you this.
Yep. Rob, I was just going to say, I totally second that. At Microsoft, as you can imagine, we use a slightly different tool called Microsoft Teams.
I was going to say.
That takes the place of both Zoom and Slack, which is why I think we've seen so much growth of it during the pandemic. But Jennifer's spot on. Creating those fun spaces for people to do fun things with each other digitally. It may not replace the complete connection that you get when doing it in person, but it's super helpful and super valuable. And agree with her. You do need to let people bring all their opinions, and that can create some tension or debate, but in general, or on balance, we think it's super healthy and a great way to create culture that's digitally first, or digital first and physical second.
I want to go back slightly, but also kind of move forward. So, have you seen, Chris, this going remote, or kind of allowing the possibility of remote work, increasing the talent pool? And I would say increasing the talent pool in like measurable ways. Ways that show up in your DEI goals, in your ESG goals. What have you observed on paper there?
Yeah, without a doubt, being able to hire people and let them stay wherever they are has allowed us to expand the pool of candidates that we're looking at, and frankly, more expand the number of people who say yes. Because it's not like we weren't recruiting from all over the world in the past, but now it's just so much easier for an employee to say, oh, I can stay wherever I am.
Mm-hmm.
Being in Redmond, Seattle, Washington, you don't have a super high African-American, Black, Hispanic, Latino population in Seattle. Whereas we've been able to hire New York City, Miami, Atlanta, many, many more cities where people don't have to relocate. And that's been big for us. And it has really, in my organization alone, before COVID, we had no marketers that weren't in either, I'd say, California or in Redmond. And now we have marketers probably in 10, 11 different states in the US, all part of the corporate marketing team. And that's obviously fantastic. And it's led to great hires of talent, whether they're white, African-American, Hispanic, et cetera. It's just been a great unlock of talent for us.
Jennifer, have you seen kind of measurable, have you been able to meet measurable DEI goals through this remote work in the same way? And I would add, do you see this show up in your emissions data? I mean, I don't know how exhaustively Twitter tracks its emissions, but do you see the fact that people aren't commuting every day show up in your Scope 1 or Scope 2 emissions?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first part first. Definitely, we've seen our ability to move towards some of our very aggressive diversity inclusion goals expand by opening up the talent pool to more diverse talent, and as Chris said, people who don't want to actually move to San Francisco and be part of that community, but stay where they are. So yeah, it is, we actually even updated our diversity and inclusion goals to be the most aggressive that that we think are in tech right now to meet by 2025. And we think we can do that in large part because of the way that we've moved in this direction with flexibility and choice. On the sustainability front, we're 15 years old as a company, and we're still in our earlier stages of sustainability efforts. But I will say we've gone aggressively into it as we move forward. And the work from home aspect of it, it's trade-offs. Like we actually have some training that we provide people who are working from home of how they can meet sustainability goals at an individual level with their own households. Because we can do things at the corporate level, but with everyone at home right now, what they do at home actually does matter across the board. So we give trainings and tips around that. And we also have a calculator that they can use to make assessments and about trade-offs, especially as we start to reopen, of where they live, how often they'll travel, how often they commute to the office, so they can kind of look for themselves what kind of footprint that they actually also create by the choices they make about how often they come in, et cetera. Our data centers are probably our biggest carbon footprint, or a significant part of our carbon footprint, and that's something that we're also setting aggressive goals to address.
Right, and of course they always work from home, I guess, because they live in the server in a data center. Chris, I just want to ask you. I mean, does Microsoft kind of tracking how its work from home goals affect its emissions goals? How does it integrate the many different kinds of remote work that are possible with its climate goals?
Yeah, it's such a great question. We've come to realize that work settings are going to change over time, but our sustainability commitment obviously can't. And so we've made these very bold commitments, which include becoming carbon negative, water positive, zero waste, all by 2030. And there's just so much we're doing around this area. Probably the most important thing is to shift to 100% renewable energy by 2025, but we're also investing in a huge carbon removal tech through a big fund called the Climate Innovation Fund, which we have $1 billion in. So and then as you may know, we make all our carbon emissions information public through an annual sustainability report. Really just a small part of last year's reduction was due to the type of sort of decreased activity that the world experienced because of COVID. And honestly, we don't know that that's sort of sustainable. We don't know that we will be in this sort of COVID situation forever. So we have to, take what we can get. We like progress of any kind, but really, I think we have to make focus on more significant sources of progress. And renewable energy for a company that has more data center regions in the world than any other company, that's not going to really change with COVID or not. So
it's always going to be electricity. I think that's always going to be the biggest goal. And of course, it's so funny because we talk about sustainability. We talk about sustainability, but we often mean climate sustainability, but it sounds like you're also describing social sustainability and what can be maintained over a long period of time.
Right.
I want to ask one last question of Jennifer first, which is what worries you most as we continue to go into the future? What do you feel like you haven't figured out about remote work, or that we as a society haven't figured out about remote work?
Yeah, so one thing that worries me is the fact that we just don't know what we don't know. And that if I learned anything over the course of this last 18 months, it's that every time we had plans, we opened our offices for 2 weeks and we had to shut them down again because of Delta. So it's just the ability to be able to pivot, plan, but also be ready to pivot. It worries me to stay ahead of that. But also just, the people have gotten used to working remotely. But the big challenge is going to be when people are in different work modes, people working at home, some people working in the offices, and changing those mindsets and changing those behaviors to create a level playing field that people don't revert back to some of the behaviors that make people feel left out when they're at home. Chris mentioned some of the things we're doing, those things too, like one tweet, one screen, those kind of things. But it is a world we haven't navigated yet in a real way, and it's gonna take a lot of focus.
Yeah, and Chris, very quickly, what's your biggest worry?
Yeah, I think I'll just focus on mental health. I think the stress and the uncertainty and the just safety people feel that people are worried about, it's weighing on managers heavily, it's weighing on employees, and being able to create an environment where people can take care of themselves and still professionally develop, still contribute to the company. I'd say the broad concern I would just have is, is mental health of the workforce broadly in the world. And anything we can do to help there is obviously, I think, a good investment.
Makes sense. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you both so much for joining us today, and thank you for watching.
Thanks for having us.